Hi, this is Dr. Cyrus Veil, child psychologist, coming at you with the video on some particulars about sibling conflict. It's a complex and stressful topic, but let's dig in. Well, sibling conflict, fighting brothers and sisters and things like that. It's a tough one. Many kids who go into therapy end up having sibling conflict as being basically the number one thing that's really bothering them and why they're acting out, which is understandable. It can be a really big deal to be in that kind of conflict with someone that you live around day in, day out, particularly when you're a kiddo and you don't really have a lot of power, experience, and self-control and brain development and all that in such an important and complex thing. Complex, indeed, it really is. Fights can be really complicated in general. But let's talk about a couple of common, troubleshooting points for sibling conflict. So, first, let's talk about kids' perception of fairness. So, kids have a very distinct sense of fairness, just like adults tend to. However, with kids, that sense of fairness tends to be a lot more kind of strict and literal and concrete in a sense, without a lot of nuance. One example of this is in therapy with kids before, when I've helped them understand nuance and grayness about fairness. I've created kind of like imagine you're on a desert island kind of thing with me. It's just you and me, and we're talking about what's fair. And one example of it is I'll be like, okay, we stumble across this gallon jug of fresh water, and we're both so thirsty. So we're going to divide that 50-50, right? And I'll typically be talking with like a, 5, 6, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, something like that. And most of them are going to be like, of course, that's fair. And I'll be like, really? I want you to look at me and look at you. I have twice, maybe 3 times the body that you do, because I'm a lot bigger than you are, because I'm a big guy. So I need a lot more water than you do. You don't need anywhere near as much. And so it's not really fair for you to get 50% of that. And then I'll flip that on its head and say, like, now imagine we find one hammock, and it can fit one person. And on the floor at night, there's like bugs and snakes and stuff that come out. So we're going to just switch off 50-50, right? I'll take one night, you'll take one night in the hammock, right? And they're kind of like, yes. And I go, no, of course not. You will sleep in the hammock. I will sleep in the floor. I'm a grown up. I'm better able to protect myself than you are, so there's nuance to fairness. But the reason this matters for sibling conflict is because this is usually a really big part of it. And kids will either have this overly concrete sense of it, or kind of the reverse, where they have just this kind of funky subjective sense of it that just kind of follows their own whims. An example of this I've seen is when it comes to brothers taking turns and sharing a video game console, where there's this kind of scawampus thing that will go on where it's like, well, but I let you play with me even though it was my turn, so that means I get to take a longer turn. And then the other siblings like, no, the turns were 30 minutes each, or they weren't even really having a good system for taking turns. And so it's been sort of surprising how much I've needed to hand over hand, or at least instruct parents to hand over hand that. Like, for the time being, I know that they're 8 and 12, but I want you to literally come over with a timer on your phone that you manage, and they each get a half an hour turn on the console or something like that. So bottom line is, you have to really watch out for a sense of fairness. And kiddos can be very concerned about that, really, really concerned about that. And you, on the one hand, have to accept that they have an overly little, overly concrete sense of that. So, sometimes you have to flow with that as best you can. At the same time, though, you don't want to assume that they know how to manage dealing with that sense of fairness, because that's really important. Probably you adults can think of circumstances where you felt like a friend or a family member wasn't treating you fairly when it comes to something like money or effort or chores, or something like that. Like, I'm always available to you when you need something, and you can call me at any time. But then when I call you when I'm upset and need someone to talk to, you're never available. It matters. It really matters a lot in a relationship. It can result in a lot of acting out in order to get even, because you don't feel like things are fair. So you have to watch out for that, and don't make the assumption that kiddos have a good sense of fairness that's actually sort of practical in the real world, and that they know how to manage it even if they do have a reasonable sense. So you might have to jump in there and provide hand-over-hand support regarding fairness. So that's the first issue. Second issue regarding sibling conflict is that very commonly with sibling conflict, you have, especially when it's really problematic, complex sibling conflict, you have kiddo number one, who is, we'll call this kiddo the instigator. And then we have kiddo number two, who is the exploder. Kiddo number one usually is very good at being kind of sneaky. Poke, 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 look around, no one's watching, poke, 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 look around, no one's watching, poke, poke, poke. And then exploder explodes, and then there's a fight. And then it's easy for instigator kiddo to kind of play the victim, as it were. And I'm not suggesting that kids are doing something nefarious. It's just kind of a natural instinct. But that's often what happens. And so what happens is we'll tend to see only explosive kid. That's where because we generally don't see the kind of instigative behavior, or it's easy for us to kind of brush it off a little bit because it's not as big of a deal. And in a sense, that's kind of true. But in another sense, it really isn't. It's often as much, in some cases, kind of more of the problem than the instigator. I've been in circumstances where I've basically had kind of like an identified client where this kiddo was exploding, and it really is a problem. Like, I'm not dismissing that, but come to find out that kid, the explosive kid, basically leaves everyone alone unless they're poked at a bunch. And so more or less the likelihood is if the other siblings were not doing a lot of poking and instigating on the sly, usually, then there wouldn't be much of a problem. So what we want to do in this situation, it's not that we're going to completely ignore the explosive kid, but we want to try to just shift our focus onto the instigation, because that's a lot of usually what's often leading up to the problem. Maybe not exclusively, but often. And so there's a balancing that needs to take place where we want to shift our focus. Number two, in this situation, we want to, we want to place our focus there, and we also want to jump in with a lot of kind of coaching and guidance, because very commonly the exploder isn't using good, clear cues to say, I don't like it when you poke at me like that. And the poking can be literally physical, like little physical hassling. It can be verbal hassling. It can be subtle messing with rules and things like that. Things, there can be all kinds of things that'll go on. And then what we want to do is leading me up to my third point is the use of punishment with kiddos who fight. So if you followed me at all, you hear me say that I don't like punishment very much, and I don't. However, if you're going to use it, and some people would consider this to be a punishment, I would just call it an intervention. Let's not worry about that for now. But if you're going to intervene with kiddos, you want to do it with both. Meaning we don't want to get locked into just like focusing on the exploder. We also want to be careful about focusing only on the instigator, because either one can cause the other side of the fight to get reinforced. Meaning, I did something that kind of fueled the conflict, and then that got the other one in trouble. Ha ha, I got you. So we want to be careful. If you're going to intervene, you want to intervene with both, basically, no matter what. And in some cases, that's not going to end up actually being fair, because you might have one kiddo who's bears more of the burden for the fight in a particular situation. But in general, it's going to end up panning out a lot better. You also want to be careful about just relying on punishment alone. So one example of this might be if you've got kiddos who are fighting over, say, a video game console or a toy or something like that. If you just take the toy away, well, the problem is that doesn't really teach anyone anything. Just in the same way that if I were trying to teach you how I do my kind of filming workflow here on YouTube, if you made a mistake and I just punished you for it, it's going to signal you and kind of motivate you, I guess. It probably is going to stress you out too, but it's not really going to teach you anything about the workflow itself. So just like that pair of brothers I was mentioning who needed a lot of hand-over-hand support with sharing a video game console, sometimes it's really surprising the kind of coaching kiddos need on how to express themselves clearly, on how to set rules, on how to assertively set limits with each other. Another example of this that I've seen is with young kids who get bothered when kids come close to them. We'll say things like, be nice, but the kiddo doesn't really know what that means. And so we end up needing to say things like, hey, you can say own space and put your hand out. And that will help other kids understand that you want to be in your own space. But we can't just leave it there, because in this case, let's say we're talking about a 2, 3, 4-year-old. It's not fair to kind of have that kid sort of bear the burden for managing a fight. We need to be able to jump in and say, okay, he said own space. That means you need to bring your body away from him. And so often a lot more supervision and coaching and support is needed with kiddos who are in conflict. So I hope these tips were helpful. Sibling conflict is complicated and can be really, really intense. But like a lot of problems in life, once we start to kind of identify some of the things that seem to be really related and kind of contributing, and start to work on those kind of piece by piece, it's surprising how much progress we can make with them. So at any rate, this is Dr. Cyrus Veil. Be on the lookout for more content soon. I know I've been a little bit quiet, but I think I'm ready now.